Hi, I'm Amanda, the founder of Prana Thrive, and I have with me one of my practitioners, Tracy. And
hello.
and in this session, we are going to go through a smart gut microbiome report. This is an excellent, very comprehensive test, stool test that we do with our clients to provide us with a very high level of data and information that we can understand their digestive issues, looking at their overall gut health, immune system, inflammation response, and so many other symptoms or health conditions that we can really start to understand what's going on for that person. And then also creating a really effective and targeted treatment plan based on that information. Tracy and I are both functional naturopaths. We have been in the health industry for, nearly 20 years. But for the last sort of 5 years or so, really focusing a lot more on all the new microbiome information that we have. And it's really the last couple of years that we also have a huge amount of science and research to really understand our bacteria in a lot of detail and also understand things that we can do to address or adjust any imbalances or deficiencies that show up, and how that will have a positive impact on our health. So I am going to share my screen and talk you through a microbiome report. And then Tracy and I are going to talk through some of the different areas. So a smart gut microbiome test. So you send a stool test to the lab and they have a very specific DNA sequencing that they do. It's quite a specialized lab that we use. And the report we receive is 42 pages. So it's a huge amount of information. And then what we do with our clients is we go through and explain what the information means, how it relates to them and their health, and then a treatment plan that we create as well. Okay. So this is one of the first pages that I go through with the client. It's their microbial diversity. So diversity is the number of bacteria. The higher the number that we have, the higher the diversity score will be on this little scale here, and the more benefits it has for our health when we have a higher diversity. So what we want to aim for is that high diversity of lots of different types of bacteria. Understanding, though, the exact bacteria in that diversity is really important as well. So sometimes we can have some non-beneficial bacteria bumping up that diversity. So the higher, the better is not always the case, but ideally we want to have lots of beneficial bacteria. So this report, or this person's sample here, this marker here of 4.34, this is a medium diversity. And it is exactly in the middle. If you look at the markers underneath, from 4 to 4.7, so 4.3.5. So this is telling me that, yes, this person has a medium diversity, which is good, but we want to aim for a higher diversity because ideally, around the sort of top end of that green zone, possibly, into that yellow zone, because that means that we have more beneficial bacteria. So this is just giving an overall understanding. And then the rest of the report gives some really specific information around the groups, subgroups, and individual species that make up this diversity. Now, the second page here is a dysbiosis compass. Dysbiosis means imbalance of bacteria. So this is also a more general overview initially, but it gives us a really great understanding as to whether this person has high levels of bacteria that are not ideal or causing more inflammation, or whether they have low or missing beneficial bacteria that are really important to help reduce inflammation or support digestion, immune system, and so on. So this graph here is definitely showing, I would say, a moderate level of dysbiosis. We look at the difference with the two shapes here. When there's this excess pink area out to the white, it does indicate high levels of inflammatory bacteria. And when we've got some missing low levels, so when this pink is dropped down, all this sort of green shaded area here is an indication of a lack of important bacteria. So the rest of the report gives the specifics, but this gives a good understanding as to whether there is imbalance there or not, which is something that we're seeing in most clients have at least a medium, if not a very high level of dysbiosis. So then I'm going to get down here to the first main page, looking at the phylum level bacteria. So this page here is a really great way to have a nice sort of snapshot or understanding of the entire microbiome of this person, because it's looking at the phylum level, which are all of these names here. These are all the phylum groups of bacteria, which are basically like, if you can imagine, like family groups of bacteria. So we can have anywhere from 1 to hundreds of different species within each phylum. And each phylum will have a subgroup of bacteria and then an individual list of species in that as well. So this page is looking from that phylum level, which gives us that first level of understanding. And as we go through the report, we start to get much more deeper and specific understanding about different bacteria and then linking to different symptoms and health issues. But we can definitely get some from a good understanding from this first page. So the table, the pie graph, and the colored bar graph here are the same sort of information, just displayed 3 slightly different ways. So I do find this second half of the page here gives more detail and easier visually to understand and explain as well. So on this page here, we're looking at all the phylum groups down the left-hand side. The green zone in the middle here is the ideal or medium range for each particular group of bacteria. So what we want to see is a marker, the little marker there with U above it, percentage next to it. That's the level for that client that they've sent this sample. So we're wanting to see those markers in the green zone to indicate a more balanced level of that bacteria. But obviously it's very common for us to be seeing them out of balance. That's why people are coming to do this test and to work with us. So it's very common to then see low levels of bacteria or not detected bacteria, and also potentially in the yellow zone, which is indicating a high level, which obviously on this page there isn't at the moment. So green means balance, and it's an example of understanding that it's not about having all high levels of certain bacteria. It's about having the right balance, and the right ratio of certain types of bacteria is really, really important. So for example, this person actually has initially a very good ratio of these first 2 groups. So Firmicutes and Bacteroidetes, these are the 2 largest groups of bacteria that make up the microbiome. And we should have a certain ratio to support our body's inflammatory response, digestive pathways, our immune system. And so usually having at least 50% Firmicutes, and this person has 59. So this is quite a good. Usually the medium zone is 45 to 70. But if we want to get more specific to more optimal or ideal, we're looking more 50, somewhere between the 50 to 70. So really around that 60 is excellent. And so that means that there are high level of Firmicutes, which are really important anti-inflammatory bacteria. And then the best ratio with your Bacteroidetes is usually around that 30 to 35%. So this person has that 35.8. So this is a really good ratio of these 2 different groups. Bacteroidetes are important for your body's immune system. And so having a good level of those bacteria is really important. If Bacteroidetes is very low on this page, then we start to look at any immune deficiencies. So is the person getting a lot of recurrent infections? It could be coughs, colds. It could be recurrent skin infections or UTI infections. There's a lot of different types of infections that it could be. But having the immune system sort of struggling to deal with treating those is one possible. Or it can be also more allergy-like symptoms, hay fever, sinus, and so on. And then even though this is an important immune group of bacteria, if it does show up very high, which is something we do also see, if it does show quite high on the scale here, then we start to look at the negative impact that indicates. So sometimes we have bacteria that are producing certain toxins that cause inflammation and therefore linked to symptoms. And then other times we'll have really important beneficial bacteria that are just shifted in the wrong direction or at the wrong level. And then that starts to become more of an indication or has been then associated with certain conditions or health issues. So Bacteroidetes in a very high level has been associated with weight gain, insulin resistance, and more sort of low-grade chronic type inflammation. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Tracy, at the moment?
Did you want to talk about the super low and super high Firmicutes?
Oh, yeah, great. Excellent. So when Firmicutes are very important anti-inflammatory bacteria, there are hundreds of different types of Firmicutes. So then we can get really specific in understanding individual either groups or species, but collectively helping to deal with inflammation. So if you've got a low level of firmicutes, then you've got a low level of a reduced ability to deal with inflammation, which we really don't want. We don't want that. Our body potentially has triggers for inflammation all the time, whether it's foods we're eating, stress, our hormonal metabolism. So many things will trigger some type of inflammation that our body is constantly trying to create homeostasis or balance. So firmicutes is a very controlling, balancing group of bacteria. So a low level really reduces that ability. Now, a low level could also be because of dietary deficiency. So, for example, if your diet is quite low in fiber, now fiber, we have different sources of fiber. So looking at, nuts and seeds, for example, whole grains, green leafy vegetables, different even fruits. So different foods that have a different profile of fiber. But if our diet is quite low in fiber, those bacteria can starve. And that's one of the reasons that it's low. Now, sometimes I also see very low levels for people who've been following a low FODMAP diet for a long time. Now, this is a big topic, FODMAP, and so it's something that not everyone with gut issues needs to be following that low FODMAP diet. A lot of people do find it beneficial, but also a lot of people do not, which is an example of just there are so many diets and it really does depend on a lot of factors for that individual person. But something I have seen, I've been doing this for nearly 7 years, so something that I have seen often is that when someone's been following a low FODMAP diet for maybe 12 months or longer, I have many clients, it's been a couple of years, and that was either recommended by another practitioner, a doctor, possibly gastroenterologist, and it's been helpful. It's reduced their symptoms, but effectively they still have their health issues and symptoms, and they've kept following that diet because they're sort of too scared to come off that, or not really knowing what else to follow. And then the long-term implication of following that low FODMAP diet, because it is reducing a lot of fiber-related foods, is that group of bacteria is just slowly getting starved. And we really don't want that. So even we might recommend a low FODMAP diet to start with, but ultimately we're always aiming to get clients off that style of diet and reintroducing those higher fiber foods, but in a slow and very specific process as well. High levels of firmicutes in some ways so if it's just around that 70, that's still fairly balanced. Say it's 80, or I've even seen clients with over 90% firmicutes. In some ways it's helpful because you've got a high level of anti-inflammatory bacteria, but it's still a type of dysbiosis, which means imbalance. So when we have certain levels of bacteria that are just too far out of their range, there's always going to be other bacteria that compensate, that shift possibly in the wrong direction. So firmicutes, when you have a high level of firmicutes, it's generally a response to inflammation. So most times when I see high firmicutes, the person has potentially a lot of inflammatory symptoms. A big area we work with clients is IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, or IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, but also helping people with autoimmune, recurrent infections, hormonal issues, so skin issues, particularly autoimmune skin, like psoriasis is a big one. So a lot of health issues that are inflammatory. So that high level of firmicutes is a shift of that bacteria to try and deal with that inflammation. But what will happen is this second group here, Bacteroidetes, will drop down really low. So it'll be like a seesaw effect. So a really high firmicutes will generally be also, then we will see a very low level of Bacteroidetes. And then that creates a huge lowered ability for your body to be dealing with inflammation. Because what we know now is that really up to 80% of our body's immune response or inflammatory response actually comes from our microbiome. So if we understand all the different types of bacteria and their levels, we can really understand then is there imbalances contributing to our inflammation, but also what we can focus on to really reduce that inflammation. Now, not in all cases, but something that I've commonly seen when firmicutes is really high, Bacteroidetes is quite low. So that sort of shift, which is really starting to indicate a lot of high inflammation. One of the other groups of bacteria that is often out of balance is this one down here, Microbiome. Now, for this person, that actually is showing as a not detected bacteria. So this is really not ideal. Sometimes there's certain bacteria that are okay if we don't have them, or is actually ideal if we don't have them, if they're some inflammatory pathogenic bacteria. This is the phylum group for a really important species, Akkermansia. I'll talk about that a little bit more a couple of pages down. But when you are missing that bacteria or have low levels, then it creates a lot of gut lining inflammation. Typically, people have often heard the term leaky gut. Leaky gut is more of a simplified name for intestinal permeability. This is a really important bacteria for the gut lining. So it's hard to know what happened first, but I would commonly see that sort of shift. Obviously not with this person, they are missing, but these are quite balanced, which is really it is actually quite helpful, but there's still enough things that are not where they should be that would be impacting on this person's health.
Did you want to go into explaining what some of your approaches are when you've got those imbalances in the firmicutes and the Bacteroidetes?
Yeah, sure. So obviously for this person, they are balanced. But yes, typically I would be looking at, so low firmicutes, we're wanting to focus on increasing fiber in the diet. But obviously, like I said, if you're on that low fiber diet because of that inability to be digesting a lot of high fiber foods, we want to do that really, really slowly. So initially, I do find certain prebiotic supplements are really helpful, especially with a certain combination of ingredients that really help to reduce a lot of inflammation as well. So it starts to sort of combat why that imbalance is there, but it's also starting to feed some of those important bacteria. So many amazing prebiotics, but a couple of my favorites, arabinogalactin, which is from the larch tree, similar to slippery elm. I think more people have heard of slippery elm. That's quite an anti-inflammatory plant, herb as well. PHGG, partially hydrolyzed guar gum, or also known as sunfiber, is an excellent prebiotic, very well researched to feed a whole range of different bacteria. And that's very helpful for increasing and building up that firmicutes, but also many other types of bacteria as well. And then we have different anti-inflammatory, either herbs or nutrients that might be combined. Tracy and myself will use a whole range of different brands and different supplements. So we're very selective when we're working with that individual person to what they might need. So glutamine, L-glutamine, for example, is helping to reduce inflammation, but it's also very balancing for if we're wanting to really improve those anti-inflammatory bacteria. What else do I use? So I'm thinking of other anti-inflammatory herbs, some remedies that have cat's claw in there, for example, or marshmallow root, meadowsweet. So there's a number of different either anti-inflammatory or prebiotic nutrients, often in powder form for that type of bacteria if we're wanting to really reduce a lot of inflammation and make it easy to digest. And then foods, of course, we're wanting to start increasing certain fiber foods. So it depends on what the person's already eating. So for some people, they're just needing to increase maybe some of their green cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, broccolini, and so on. For some people, that may actually be one of their top food triggers. So obviously, we're not then wanting people to add that in. Sweet potato, for example, is a great resistant starch food that also really helps. Sometimes, I wouldn't say as often, but sometimes that can be an issue, those high starch foods for some people as well. So again, we just want to go quite slow. Looking at like a smoothie. Smoothie is a great way of including some really great anti-inflammatory or fiber type food. So even like blueberries, for example, a great source of polyphenols, which is an antioxidant that is also a prebiotic. So that's helping to feed those types of bacteria as well. And then in a smoothie form, you've got something that's relatively easy to digest because all those ingredients are blended. Drinking it slowly is key. And you can add seeds, a mix of either chia seeds, hemp seeds, flaxseed meal, is a great, a combination's great sources of fiber, and also high omega-3, but slow. If it's something, if there's if a smoothie is not something you've ever had before, then starting off with, just some simple ingredients, trying a small serve and just seeing, it depends on how sensitive you are to different food changes. But that's the sort of thing we start to help clients with.
So, there's a few things I wanted to sort of mention. So when we see that low bacteria in relation to diet, often the carnivore diet and the ketogenic diet can be contributing to a lack of bacteria in the gut. So I do see that often, and I understand that people are on those diets sometimes as a coping mechanism because those fiber foods, they're just reactive to everything. But what we need to do is to decrease that inflammation so we can slowly bring in some more fibers so we can actually start to get some more balance in the gut. So I think those extreme diets done long term do start to create dysbiosis, which is an imbalance in the bacteria of the gut.
Yeah, definitely. No, thanks for mentioning that, Tracy, because especially, yes, the Bacteroidetes, when we see a very high level of Bacteroidetes, one of the questions, if we haven't already discussed that, would be if the person has been following that either carnivore or ketogenic, so either too much protein or too many high-fat foods, or sometimes it might be too much of the wrong protein and the wrong fats as well. And so then it's shifted the microbiome in the wrong direction. And then for some people, they've done that as more of a short-term diet and it's been really helpful. And then maybe their bacteria has, it's also a good way for us to understand if that diet that someone's been following for the last sort of 3 to 6 months is helping or not, looking at the different levels of bacteria and how they're showing up as well. So there's so much that we can tell. Actually, that's a common question, is when is the best time to do a microbiome test, as far as like a time of day or the time, what have I eaten? What supplements have I taken? Do I stop taking my supplements? All the many, many questions. And this type of test, this test that we use, Smart Gut test, is a very sensitive test. It's able to pick up hundreds up to 1,000 or so of our bacteria using a very specific DNA sequencing. So it is, the timing is not as, it's not as sensitive, I guess, to maybe compared to some other types of like culturing tests. And what I mean by that is the shifts in our microbiome happen sort of fairly slowly. So if just depending on, foods or supplements that we've been eating or taking day by day, what I mean is, so even a really common, I have a lot of clients that have very changeable bowel motions. So they could have constipation for a few days, then they could have really loose, watery diarrhea bowel motions for a few days. And so then, what if it was different? What if I did this test when I had constipation, but then I had diarrhea a few days later? The bacteria don't suddenly shift in such great amounts, but your symptoms can because of the imbalance of bacteria. So it, things change slowly, even if we're looking over months of style of diet that you're eating. Obviously, if you were to do a detox, like a juice fast or a water fast, or, some type of diet that's quite extreme to what you're normally eating, then doing a microbiome test straight after that would not be ideal, unless, of course, you were wanting to see, maybe it was a second test and you're wanting to see the changes of that. But otherwise, what we're wanting to look at is, okay, what have you been doing, foods or supplements? What have you been taking over the last months? And then we're looking at doing the test and understanding that information from there. So there's quite a few bacteria on this page that are actually then represented in more detail on other pages further down the report. So I'm just thinking that I might scroll down and start talking about those. Is there anything, Tracy, that you think we should discuss further just on this page?
Yes, let's talk about the proteobacteria and where do you, because I often see the proteobacteria quite high, but the additional bacteria might be quite low.
Sure, on the page 19, the pathogen.
Yeah. So at what point do you really see that proteobacteria being an issue when we don't have the pathogenic high?
Yeah.
Because I kind of go, well, let's look at all the inflammatory markers. What else is
Mm.
going on? So what is your process around how much that is being an issue? And do you treat it directly or do you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes like the total level of a group is definitely helpful information, but then understanding the breakdown of the individual species is the most helpful. And then that's where it does start to get quite complex, the different types of bacteria. But that's what we do. So try and understand and then relay that information. So, and then sometimes it is as much as we've been doing this for years, the knowledge we have, sometimes there are a few different sort of levels. It can be a bit tricky to try and understand exactly what's going on for that person. But, in most cases, we can work that out with certain questions and obviously analyzing a lot of other areas as well. So proteobacteria is an example of a group that have many different types. So compared to when I've talked about firmicutes, yes, lots of different types, but they're all helping to deal with inflammation in some way. Proteo, we have some excellent, really important beneficial bacteria. Then we have some opportunistic bacteria. Opportunistic are types of bacteria that they're not necessarily pathogenic, but if they are in the wrong level, so say they are, a good example is some of the sulfur producing bacteria. So we do have, I will scroll down to that page. Actually, I think I will scroll down to that page right now and we can go back to some of these. But if we look at the breakdown of some of the different types in this page here, this is a good example. So the proteome, we've got these two, Oxalobacter and your beneficial E. coli. These are both important beneficial bacteria. And then you've got these two, the desulfivibrio and the bilophila. And these are sulfur-producing bacteria. Now, sulfur is important for detoxification, helping to deal with inflammation in the body as well. But if we have the wrong balance of sulfur bacteria, then we have that excess production of hydrogen sulfide, and that creates a lot of bloating, gas. A possible or common symptom is like really smelly gas as well. I know people are embarrassed to talk about that, but it's what we do all day, every day. Talk to clients about their bowel motions and their other digestive symptoms. So if you've got too many sulfur bacteria, and then you may have those symptoms, and then that's creating a lot of extra discomfort or imbalance. So sometimes it may be dietary. So, for example, the lab do mention a few food, possible reasons or associated information on different bacteria. And then we, Tracy and myself, when we're working with clients, we go into much more detail in understanding other foods or what that bacteria, what that may be causing for that person. So the lab do give a little bit description, but we get much more specific with each person that we're explaining it to. So it does mention here that decreasing fat intake, like animal fats, for example, and dairy, can help to reduce those excess bacteria and therefore reduce that hydrogen sulfide. And so if I do look at that and go, okay, is this person consuming a lot of dairy or some high fat animal based foods that are really not being digested properly? And then in a lot of cases, also that person can have this high and they're not. So then there's other reasons. It's not just a dietary, it's a shift of dealing with inflammation. And there's a lot we can understand. And sometimes we just want to look at all the data and just see where we can create those shifts and help improve those symptoms. So your question, Tracy, around the proteome. So yes, on that initial page, if that proteobacteria level is sitting really high, in most cases, so say if it's above the 3.5%, if it's around just that borderline, it's usually not a big deal, but I do obviously then look at this individual page as well. And then if it's sitting extremely high, so sometimes we might see, say, 10%. I don't think that's really common, but I definitely have seen it plenty of times. Say you've got 10% proteo, then usually either on this page, you might have both of these sitting excessively high, Or there is another page that looks at a breakdown of the pathogenic. So pathogenic are those, and there's lots of different types. So I'll go to that page soon as well. And then, so there we're wanting to see, okay, are there bacteria, pathogenic bacteria there that are producing a lot of extra compounds, or what they're called metabolites. So what our bacteria produce, metabolites, and there are a lot of inflammatory or toxic metabolites from certain bacteria. And so that's where we want to really reduce those by changes in our diet, but we prescribe really specific supplements that have been tested and proven to address those bacteria if needed as well. So there's, definitely a few different things to look at. If there is another part of the report that we can search and start to look at some really specific species that may be part of that, like proteo group, for example. So I haven't got that report here, but that Corona, that is also a good way to dive a little bit deeper into some of the species that may not have been, I guess this, even though this is a 42-page report, this is a shortened summary of the most commonly sort of seen proteo, but there are so many other types as well. So then there's another part of the report that we can actually basically click on, opens up a diagram with a list of other types of bacteria. So sometimes people have less common. These would be the more common, and some people have the less common that then we want to address those. So then understand, okay, are they inflammatory? Are they pathogenic? And how can we address those? So just while we're on this page, actually, these two individual species are always talked about, whether they're in balance or not, because they are very important to understand. Oxalobacter formigenes, this is a species that helps to break down oxalates or oxalic acid. So many foods that we eat, possibly on a daily basis, do contain oxalates. And so if we have this person is lucky, they actually have a fairly good level. If the higher you have, it's usually more ideal. But even at this point, this is a good level of oxalobacter. And so this person does have the ability to break down those oxalates. If this is at a 0 level or almost 0, extremely low, then we want to assess whether this is contributing to any symptoms that the person has, or something we definitely want to be mindful and prevent issues. Because what will happen is if you do not have any oxalobacter, there are other types of oxalate degrading bacteria as well. So there's another page in the report that looks at all. So it looks at your oxalate degradation. This is one of the most important bacteria though. So if you do not have any in total, your oxalate degrading bacteria, then what can happen is you get a buildup of calcium oxalates, or you get a buildup of calcium oxalates in your blood, and that can create and form kidney stones. Now, the number of people that I see a lack of oxalobacter is fairly high. The number of people that I see with kidney stone or past kidney stone situations is, I would say, relatively low, but it is an increased risk factor. And the more we start to understand about oxalate metabolism, foods that contain oxalates, bacteria that break down oxalates, potentially maybe not the formation of kidney stones, but even just the calcium oxalates in the blood that starts to contribute to inflammation, then we can start to look at other health issues and symptoms that relate to that as well. So it is quite an important area. Urine testing is something that I've just started more recently to double check some things as well. So for some clients, yes, they don't have any oxalobacter. We've reduced any of those high oxalate foods. We've started to recolonize some really important oxalate, degrading bacteria. And then particular clients still had, the symptoms. We were just trying to work out. We'd been working on things for a good 6 months or so. But at that point then, did a urine test. He did a urine test, 24-hour oxalate urine test, and his urine was showing high oxalates. So even though his diet, we had cut out what we thought were the high oxalates, we were recalling, but it was an indication we haven't done enough. So we need to work on how we can improve that more. I would say, though, for a lot of clients, it is not so complex. And obviously this person, they're lucky, they've got that bacteria. So there are certain probiotics, there are certain foods, and that's something we really go into in quite a lot of detail with our clients if that's something that they need to be concerned about. And then a really important beneficial bacteria here, this is a beneficial species of E. coli. Now, I think most people hear E. coli and think, isn't that like food poisoning, gastrobug? Yes, there are different types of E. coli. There is another page in the report that looks at that particular E. coli called Shigella, causes a lot of diarrhea or even IBS-related symptoms. Often people are relating IBS to foods, and then sometimes it's actually very high levels of pathogenic bacteria that's causing those symptoms. Usually it's a combination of both. But this is a beneficial species. So even though it's part of the same family, it is a totally different bacteria. It has many health benefits. The lab have included a little description here, which we go into much more detail with our clients to understand. But it is helping with the production of B vitamins and vitamin K. It also improves conversion of L-tryptophan. And L-tryptophan your body will use to make serotonin and melatonin. So then if we understand that those hormones, serotonin is really important for our mood. It's a happy hormone. It is what helps to reduce feelings of anxiety or depression, helps us to deal with stressful situations. So we want to have lots of beneficial bacteria that support serotonin. This is not the only one, but it is an important one. And then melatonin is our main sleep hormone. So we want to have good levels of melatonin so that we can get to sleep, but also so we can get into a deep sleep, and then also so we can stay asleep for obviously a certain time frame. That's sort of anywhere from 6 to 8 hours is sort of the average. Some people need a bit more. Some people would do okay with less. But ultimately, we want to have a really good quality of sleep. So this bacteria is a very important gut-brain connecting bacteria. It's really helping to reduce feelings of stress, improve quality of sleep, but it does have many benefits for IBS symptoms, whether it's constipation. It's very well researched for helping to deal with sometimes some very long-term chronic severe constipation, but is also very helpful in addressing more loose bowel motion type IBS or that changeable IBS as well. So this person actually has a non-detected level, which I see in a very large percentage of clients. This is one of the more specialized probiotics, Mutaflor, and it contains just that one bacteria. So it's not a multi-species probiotic. It's a really specialized single species probiotic, and it's used in a very particular part of a treatment plan as far as the timing of when that is introduced. So if there is already a lot of dysbiosis of imbalance and there's inflammatory bacteria and there's leaky gut, for example, for that person, which a lot of those markers are showing in this report, actually, this is such an important probiotic that we can introduce, but we don't want to do that in the first and possibly even the second phase. Sometimes it's the third or fourth sort of step of what we're wanting to address because one, it's quite sensitive to that inflammation, but also this particular probiotic sometimes can cause negative or adverse reaction if we haven't addressed all of those other types of bacteria first. And that's one of the common reasons that people come to work with is if they've read a lot of information online, they've changed their diet, they've tried probiotics, and they've actually had negative reactions. They've actually felt worse from following some of that information. And it doesn't mean that it's not right. It's just not the right time and it's not right for that person. So that's an example of there are so many different types of probiotics. Not every one is suitable for every person, obviously, but sometimes there's a very particular dose and time frame of when that needs to be added in, but also the type of diet that is important for feeding that bacteria as well. So this type of E. coli feeds off certain fibers, but particularly resistant starch. So then we want to make sure that the diet has a good source of resistant starch. So whether that's sweet potato, bit of rice, green bananas, plantains, green banana flour, cassava flour. So there's lots of foods that we will provide our clients with a list of those sort of foods, but then we provide recipes and some really, specific ways that we can actually start to introduce those foods to support the growth of those bacteria as well.
So, question.
Yes.
Well, I first wanted to mention that the serotonin has a lot to do with motility. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, that's
so,
it. Which I think is why that's such an effective constipation supporting bacteria as well.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I think we could do a really long session just on that.
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you around how long do you normally prescribe the Nutaflor?
Oh, yeah, great question. So generally, most commonly over about 2 months. That would be the most common time frame. And the dosage is a little bit different just depending. I do find for people that are experiencing that chronic constipation, then a higher dose is going to be much more helpful. Whereas for this is general rule, but obviously because it's taking into account lots of factors. But then usually for clients that have more of the loose bowel motion or IBS, diarrhea, IBS, then a lower dose. And then, so 2 months, 2 months would be the most sort of common time frame. And then just depending on how the client's feeling after that time. So for many, if we're depending on what we're working on and what stage in their treatment plan, what symptoms they're dealing with, then usually it's a bacteria then that will focus then more on continuing to feed that with diet sources. It is something I do find that people really benefit from repeating though. So it could be repeating in 3 months, especially after maybe that first course. So if we're like, okay, we've done that for 2 months, okay, things are settling down, we've got some other things that we need to work on as well. Then, let's revisit this particular probiotic in about 3 months' time, just to make sure that, we're building up that bacteria to a good level. Or it could even be, 6 months, might be a little bit longer. For clients that still have really quite chronic constipation, I mean, there's a lot of factors. So we're usually looking at, gallbladder function, liver function, stress factors, and so on. So sometimes I might get someone to follow that for sort of 3 months, but usually 3 months would be the most time. And then it's always good to have a break. But then I do have a lot of clients over the years that have said they really feel a lot of benefits by taking it long term, but we just cycle it. And then I usually work out a cycling plan with that person so that we can, understand that sort of more long-term effect. And then for some people, it might be just repeating it every 12 months now because they've found they've got those good levels. Obviously, we can understand a lot from how the progress of how our clients, how their symptoms resolve and things start to improve, and then possibly the shifts and changes in different bacteria. But the ultimate at some point is doing a microbiome retest because that's when we can really understand if there's a bacteria that was missing that's now recolonized. So I love to see that in a microbiome retest where I had one the other day where person didn't have any. And now they've got some of that bacteria there. It's still a little bit on the low side. So that's an example of, okay, great. We've got that bacteria back in your system. You haven't taken that probiotic for, I think this client was for at least 3 months. They had been taking other things, but that probiotic had not been taken for 3 months, might have been a little bit longer. And now it's showing as a detectable bacteria. But because it's still low, then we want to make sure, okay, we do want to revisit that. So then I created a new plan. There was a few other things that were a little bit more urgent to work on. But then in 3 months' time, I did have that probiotic to add back in again for about a 1 to 2 month. So that's an example of, the importance of doing a retest as well to really see then what bacteria have increased, what we've actually recolonized, and then what ones we need to work on further as well.
And how well do you find it the E. coli does colonize with the supplementation?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's probably one that's a little bit of a mix. I've definitely seen in most clients that when we've done a retest, typically about a 6 month, like after the first test and working on a plan, I find there's a lot of information from the test, from understanding the person's symptoms and background, looking at blood tests or maybe, any other tests that might be appropriate for that person. It's a lot of information that we can really work on a good 6 month plan. Sometimes I might recommend a retest before the 6 months if the person's really still struggling, if they had maybe some very extreme high levels of inflammatory bacteria that we just want to recheck to make sure that they've been dealt with, or we're thinking, well, it sounds like they haven't, but we don't know exactly. But otherwise, 6 months would be the most common, or even past that time, 12 months. And now years, I have clients that are onto their, 5th or so retest because then we've done sort of once every 12 to 18 months, which has been excellent to see the changes and then have more of a long-term situation and understanding. So the E. coli, your question with this bacteria, is how well does it recolonize? And I wouldn't say that it is a really difficult one, but I wouldn't say that it's an easy one. It definitely sits in the middle. I know that's not a very specific answer, but I just think how many retests I've done over the last, so it's, I think when I very first started doing microbiome testing, might have been 7 years ago. The test was very basic information back then, about 3 pages, which was amazing back then. Now we have this 42-page report. So over that time of now understanding a lot more detail in the report, and a lot more research to support, and then obviously more retests, I would definitely see it in most people. They have gone from 0 to something. It was uncommon for me to see not detected again, though that has also happened. I definitely have to say there are clients that it hasn't stayed. Now, it doesn't mean that probiotic, it didn't help at all at the time, but after stopping that probiotic, that bacteria hasn't stayed in their system. So that definitely has happened. And rare would I see it go from, say, a 0 low like to a high. So even though the scale here goes up to this 1, rare that I would ever see it go past halfway. It's not a bacteria that we generally, I think it is more difficult to build up, but I definitely find that for a lot of people, we can at least get some bacteria there.
Yes, and I think it really plays making sure that they've got enough fiber in the diet to sustain and grow, these beneficial bacteria. So if the person hasn't quite reached a really diverse diet, 1, because their gut is still too inflamed, or 2, they're just fussy, or they haven't paid enough attention to having a really diverse diet of polyphenols and omega-3s and variety of fibers, it doesn't leave a really good ground, really good soil for these guys to flourish in.
That's it. Definitely we were talking about that this morning, our microbiome, we can really relate to, or our gut and our microbiome, we can relate to like a garden that, if we've got some unwanted bacteria, they're like the weeds. We need to get those out first. Actually, I'll scroll down to that page. If it's important then if we've got any missing bacteria, they're the ones we need to plant some new seeds, but we don't want to plant the seeds straight away. We need to make sure we get the weeds out first, or at least most of them, but we want to make sure that we've got the right nutrients in the soil. And so then that's looking at our diet. It's looking at those prebiotic supplements. Sometimes for some people, the supplements we can prescribe in that first month or 2 is actually so much more effective than the diet changes, because they've already tried, they're on such a limited diet. They've already tried to add foods in. Their body is just not digesting it. But then we can select really specific, sometimes quite, minimal number of ingredients. So some of the prebiotics we might prescribe might only have sort of 2 or 3 ingredients that's going to start to feed those bacteria. It's going to start to improve the nutrition in the gut. And then we can start taking really specific probiotics to seed. They're like the new plants. And then there are other bacteria that will just be low levels that we really want to feed. And so sometimes it's then just focusing on foods, but also like prebiotic supplements, like we mentioned, or there might be certain bacteria like lactobacillus and bifido that are very low. They're low as a group, or maybe a low number of different types. So we want to improve the diversity. So that's where we prescribe specific probiotics as well. So sometimes you could take a probiotic with bacteria you do actually have, but you just have really low levels. So it's like putting those extra plants in the garden, I guess, to then, and, different plants will have a synergistic effect with others. So lactobacillus, there's a group called lactobacillus, and then there are certain species of lactobacillus, like Lactobacillus reuteri, that produces something called ruterin that's a prebiotic for other bacteria. So that's an area of a lot of new research, that there's certain probiotics that will actually support the growth of other bacteria that are not in that probiotic supplement. So it's very, the complexity of how we can get our digestive garden growing. So, but this page here, these are the weeds. So this had an additional bacteria and we go from Enterobacter all the way down to this particular Clostridium. Some of these are groups. So this is, if it says family, this is like a phylum. You've got SPP, which it's a subgroup or a genus, and then you've got like an individual species. And so this page is not all of the pathogenic bacteria, but it's at least a snapshot of the major groups or individual species. And then again, we have another part of the report that we can really dive in a little bit deeper if we need to as well to understand. So on this page, what we're checking for is any presence of any of these pathogenic bacteria. Ideally, we want this whole page to say not detected, but it's very common for it not to say that. And a very common bacteria that a lot of people have high levels is this group of Streptococcus. So Streptococcus is quite inflammatory. It's quite common to see though. So a lot of people have strep bacteria and don't realize. And that's an example of, there are things that we don't know that are going on in our body that can really be causing that low-grade inflammation that's hard to pinpoint to a symptom, but our health just starts to decline, sometimes very slowly over a lot of years. But strep is a histamine-producing bacteria. Sorry, not all strep, but specific strep species, a lot of them are histamine-producing. So histamine, I think everyone's heard of histamine, and people often think sneezing, sinus, hay fever, springtime, which in Australia we're in just starting. So our body produces histamine for a whole range of reasons. But if we have bacteria that are high and we have that excess histamine, that can really contribute to a lot of symptoms and health issues. So common would be sinus. It could be itchy nose, sneezing. So it seems like hay fever, and yes, it could be as well, but it could also be at any time of the year. Gut symptoms, so general sort of IBS symptoms, bloating, reflux actually is a common one, can relate to that high histamine. Headaches and migraines can have many triggers, but excess histamine is common, and especially general food reactions or food intolerances. There are certain foods that trigger more of a histamine issue as well. So if we can balance the bacteria, we can actually reduce the effect. Well, we can, by reducing the histamine bacteria, then those foods can then not have that same histamine effect. But then we're also, by addressing other types of bacteria, we're improving how our body's digesting that food, that therefore it doesn't have that excess histamine as well. Because then we have histamine degrading bacteria, which I can definitely go into a lot. But
I was thinking that what we could do is go through this page in detail another time, and
yes,
I think we can talk about histamines. I think it's a really important one that we can go much deeper into. But let's go back to the original phylum page, finish that off, and I think that will be loads of information today.
Yeah, definitely. And then just quickly to finish the strep, it is really important to treat that high-level strep. This is a moderate high. I see clients where it is, so this is 0.3. It could be 3, 5, even 10%. That's less common. Definitely seen that though. I think the highest I have seen 20% strep. That is very, very extreme, and creates a lot of issues. But typically this is a fairly common sort of level. And then Tracy and myself, we prescribe really specific supplements. So it depends on the person, the individual symptoms. But there's a couple of supplements that I would prescribe this person that are really well proven for dealing with strep too. So ones that help to break down that biofilm, often in most cases are more effective than antibiotics, because that's something that often antibiotics would be prescribed for this type of bacteria, but this can also become antibiotic resistant. So using, some really specific supplements to help break down that biofilm and basically reduce that bacteria, and then other beneficial bacteria that also work against the strep and then prevent it from coming back. So sometimes that's a phase that people come to see us and they maybe have worked with some other practitioners, or they've followed some information themselves. They've maybe done some antimicrobial, but then they haven't done enough of the building. Building of the microbiome or understanding those really specific bacteria that then continue that important healing process. So too many antimicrobials long-term can be an issue as well. So anyway, that's, just finish off that area. So I'll just go back up to where we're looking at the phylum. I think I was going to go to, is there any particular, like I could go down to the page looking at the bifido, but was there anything particular you wanted me to go on?
Yeah. So, what do you most commonly see the issue being when you see raised cyanobacteria?
Sure, cyanobacteria, if it's high. Generally more of it, because this is just to explain, so this is an important group of bacteria that helps with your B vitamin metabolism, particularly with B12 as well. So it's supporting the conversion of our different B vitamins, and a non-detected level is not ideal. So it's a missing bacteria group, and our B vitamins are really important for our energy, nervous system, digestive function, liver function, hormone pathways, and many more things. So they're really important nutrients, and our gut bacteria influences our B vitamins. Many different bacteria influence those B vitamins in many ways. So does this group here. So for this person, obviously I would have already had a consult with them, would have gone through their symptoms, but I wouldn't be surprised if this person had fatigue or quite low energy levels, because when this is low, the actinobacteria and also the cyano not detected, you've got that real low level of B vitamin supporting bacteria. Now, if it's in the green zone, it's medium, which is where we want it to be. If it's at the high sort of end, if it's really high, so if it's quite far off the scale, I definitely would see that less often, but I have seen that. And in some ways it's good because it is supporting, it means that you've got lots of extra cyanobacteria to try and support that metabolism of B vitamins. But often then, because it's still anything that's way out of its range is still a dysbiosis or an imbalance. So then we try and understand, why is that group or individual why has that bacteria shifted for that particular person? And then usually it's asking extra questions and going through and just seeing, what else is going on for that person. So a high level is not always something we necessarily want to bring down, but we want to create balance so that, multiple groups of bacteria balance out. One of the times, if this actinobacteria, something I've definitely seen a lot of over the years, if this is really low, and maybe one of the major groups in this phylum is bifidobacterium. If the person, now this is not an always rule, but this is definitely something I've seen a lot, is if the bifidobacterium, the whole group is not detected or it's extremely low, you'll have other compensating bacteria, and cyano is one of those. So I have definitely seen in a lot of cases a really high cyanobacteria combined with a really low actinobacteria, but it won't always be like. Then I've also seen where they're both low. So it's more sort of understanding, the shift of different bacteria, and then looking to some different sort of stress factors, nervous system, brain health, and just seeing why that group is sort of compensated to try and address for some other issues out of balance. I'm not sure if you've seen that combination before, Tracy.
Yeah. I've seen the cyanobacteria really super high quite a few times, and where anything is really well above normal in the green range, I'm always thinking it's compensating for something else. So as we balance the gut, even though it's good, we want lots of it, it actually comes down into a more normal range.
Mm-hmm. True. That is exactly right. It's all about balance. And especially when we're looking at all the good bacteria, that's something that there's so much new research. So, looking actually, this next page is a really good example. I think we'll just touch on this a little bit. But lactobacillus, lactobacillus is such an important group of beneficial bacteria. There are hundreds of different types, but there are some really well-researched species of lactobacillus to support digestive function, whether it's helping to address constipation, diarrhea, or changeable bowel motions, helping to reduce food intolerances, allergy symptoms, because they're a really important immune bacteria as well. But also so we want it to be fairly high. We sort of want about 3/4 or the high end of that green zone. This is starting to get a little bit borderline. I wouldn't say it's excessive, but it's still fairly high. It's still off the scale. So then we're looking to see, okay, well, what's contributing or what's going on there with this group of bacteria. So the higher the better is definitely not the case. We definitely want high levels of some really important beneficial bacteria, but excessively high is also then it is an imbalance. And there's always going to be a compensation of other bacteria as well. So like on this page, for example, this Faecalibacterium prusnitzi, this is very excessively high. So if it's around 15 to 20%, so say it was just sitting a little bit in the yellow zone, it's quite good because it's a butyrate producing bacteria. Butyrate is one of the short chain fatty acids that our gut bacteria produce. Butyrate, now you can get butyrate as a supplement. It's called a postbiotic. Ultimately, we want to understand our probiotic bacteria and support those. But short term, I sometimes do prescribe postbiotics like butyrate, especially if it is extremely low. There is a page in this report that gives exactly out of all of the different butyrate producing bacteria what the level is. And therefore, if it's really low, I do find using that supplement short term is quite helpful. This person, though, has very high levels of this Faecali, therefore that high level of butyrate, which is good because butyrate is an anti-inflammatory compound, but it is very excessive. So then I am looking at the factors as to why that is. So it's expanded to deal with inflammation. And then usually in most cases, the person would have a lot of inflammatory symptoms. So it could be extreme IBS. It could be more the IBD, so which is your autoimmune inflammatory bowel disease, or some other autoimmune condition. There's definitely, there's a major reason that bacteria has just gone so high. And so it's not about prescribing something to bring it down. It's about looking to see where are the other areas of out of balance, and how can we reduce inflammation in a number of ways. So often, because our bacteria, our microbiome controls most of the inflammation in our body. So often it's looking at other anti-inflammatory bacteria, reducing those like the strep we just talked about, increasing some really important beneficial bacteria. And then understanding, are there foods causing inflammation? Is there stress causing inflammation? And there's often lots of things. Something not too often now, because I think there's a lot of education, understanding about the complexity of our microbiome and microbiome testing. But I definitely did find this was more common in the past. And every now and then still, that a client will say, oh, what's the one thing? What's the one thing that's going on? What is the test? What's the one thing that is my problem? And unfortunately, that would make our job so easy, and it would make our clients the work there so easy. We try and make it easy, obviously, but there's not one thing. There could be one major thing, though. I do see microbiome results where there are so many things in balance, and there is a couple of things that are just majorly out of balance. But what I'm going through in this report would probably be some of the most typical highs and lows and shifts that we can start to understand in combination, whether that's the bacteria, in combination we're understanding the link to symptoms or health issues we're understanding, and then the specifics to that individual person to see, what's going on. So we take a really detailed case history, and then continue to, when we're working with someone, we're asking questions all the way through to work out, what's going on for that person and how things are improving. So that is a lot of information. What do you think, Tracy? Should we talk about any more or leave it there for today?
Well, so with the Faecalibacterium, I 100% agree that it's raised due to inflammation. So as we start to balance that microbiome and find the root causes, because there are more than one, that it will come down. So I think we should finish off the very first page and, wrap it up.
Excellent. So let's see, what did we not talk about? Sorry?
The lenticiferae?
Lenticiferae. Interesting. Lenticiferae is a bacteria that I would say I regularly see as a non-detected level, but I also can see high levels as well. It is one of the sugar digesting bacteria. So if I see a high level, then I'm looking at the client's either their diet they've already filled in that we've already discussed, but also then sometimes asking some extra questions. I did have a client not too long ago actually that we had discussed diet already. Nothing sort of came up that I was thinking was too, high sort of sugar content. And then we got her microbiome results, and then lenticifera was actually sitting quite high. And then I asked her, I said, but you didn't mention any sort of high sugar foods. She goes, actually, no, there was probably some things that I didn't. Maybe there's some foods that I am having more regularly than I thought I was that, and it was, snacking on just biscuits and things that of course, they do have sugar, whether it's cane sugar or it's other types of sugar. Like sometimes there's just too many. We can have natural sort of fruit sugars. Even then, we don't want to be eating excessive amounts of fruit. There's a lot of different types of sugar, obviously, but there's a lot of processed sugar that feeds the wrong type of bacteria. So reducing sugars and focusing on those complex carbohydrates that's really supporting the type of the glucose that we need, and avoiding those processed sugars that are just not helping us at all. So that definitely is a bacteria that I associate with that. So is there anything else that you have seen?
No, I think that we can go into the other two later in the report.
Yeah.
Lancia and the Fusobacterium, we can.
Yeah, excellent. Actually, just quickly, I should mention the Synergistides, because that's a really interesting one. Synergistides is pathogenic, or one of the non-beneficial bacteria, and it's actually found in the mouth. But when it does show up, because this is a stool test, when it does show up in this report as a detected level, so non-detected is good. That's what we want to see, and it's what I commonly see. High levels, though, which I do fairly regularly see as well, is then an indication of a high level of that bacteria in the mouth, but it's very resilient to stomach acid. So it goes through the digestive system. It's picked up in the stool test still, or the DNA of the bacteria is picked up in the stool test. And so then I ask questions about the oral microbiome or about dental, any sort of dental issues. So it is a question we regularly ask in that initial consult, but I know in the past it was something that I was not as I was aware of it, but it wouldn't always be a commonly discussed area. And so the number of times I have seen a high Synergistides and then said to the client, when was the last time you went to the dentist? Do you have any gum inflammation, bleeding gums, any pain in any areas, teeth that need to be addressed? And in every case, the person's like, oh my gosh, how did you know? Yes, I do have. And then they've, progressed to tell me of some issues, and because it sits there in their microbiome. So then we want to understand the oral microbiome, and that's a whole nother subject, which we can definitely talk about. And but understanding the different bacteria. There's new probiotics now that are probiotic lozenges to help with that. There's certain probiotics that are already in a chewable form because they do help with the oral microbiome. And then all the things that we know, brushing our teeth, using high quality toothpaste, avoiding chemical ingredients in our toothpaste, flossing, regular dental checkups, and what we eat, avoiding sugars, so many things. But that's a good bacteria to check and discuss with people as well.
And have you seen any correlation between root canals?
Yes, I have. I would say not always when people have the high Synergistides, but there is a lot of now more research and understanding people have had root canal, and the potential, the infection that can be under in the root there, in the gum, and the long-term symptoms or health issues that can start to be contributed by that. So root canal and IBS or gut issues, yes, there is definitely a correlation there. And then we start to say, well, what is the bacteria? It's the bacteria in the mouth affecting our gut, but it's our gut that affects our oral microbiome, like you found, Tracy, with the client we were discussing earlier that had infections in the mouth, that you focus on the gut and then that all healed up. So it goes both ways. But yes, oral hygiene and dental issues more and more starting to link to our gut health, but then heart function, liver function, brain health, even looking at dementia and Alzheimer's, they're starting to link different bacteria in the mouth to those sort of conditions. So it just more and more highlights the importance that it's if we can really understand what's going on in our gut, and then we can address those areas that need to be, has huge implications positively for our health, not just now, but for future health as well.
Lovely. Thanks, Amanda.
That's okay. Thanks, Tracy, for joining me today. So thank you for listening. I really hope you found that helpful. It's just a really little bit of an example of how much we can understand from this report. And then there's so much more that we go through. So with every client, we're spending a lot of time before that results session as well, going through all the information, and then really, explaining all those top areas to the that client specifically, so that they've got a really good understanding for them personally. But there's a lot more that we can go through. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.